My millionaire daughter built her entire brand on one cruel lie that I, her mother, was dead. To protect that lie, she trapped me in her mansion, took away my phone, and legally erased my existence. I was forced to watch her cry on TV about the tragic orphan life she never lived, all while treating me like her dirty secret. But she made one critical mistake: she forgot who I was. And she never imagined that her silenced, frail mother would be the one to bring her $10 million empire crashing down in front of the entire world. The light in Palo Alto is different, you know. It's sharp and unforgiving, making everything look like it's under a microscope. That's how I felt that day, standing just inside the glass wall of my daughter Madison's home, watching the photo shoot unfold on the lawn. Her estate, a place the magazines called a $10 million masterpiece of glass and stone, felt more like a museum than a home. I was just another exhibit, one they kept in the shadows. Madison would glide over between shots, all smiles and concern, adjusting the cashmere throw on my shoulders. She'd tell the photographer how much she adored having me there, but her eyes were cold with a frantic, bird-like anxiety. She wasn't looking at me. She was managing me, a potential problem she had to keep out of the frame. The protective wellness campaign, as her polished PR assistant called it, started a week later. My old smartphone, my little window to my friends and the world, was replaced with a simplified brick. It could make calls, but only to pre-approved numbers. Chloe, the assistant, told me it was to help me disconnect from all the digital stress. When my friend Sarah called, I never got the message. Chloe would tell me later that Sarah had passed on her love, but she'd sounded busy, so Chloe hadn't wanted to bother me. My mail started arriving, already opened, sorted into neat little piles. It was a service, they said, to handle junk mail and bills to shield me from any potential worry. It felt less like being shielded and more like being wrapped in cotton wool, my world shrinking, one polite decision at a time. Then came the betrayal, though at the time my heart was too full of pride to see it. Madison sat beside me, her expression a perfect blend of professional seriousness and daughterly love. She placed a heavy stack of documents on my lap. She explained it was a standard biographical release. Her company was launching a legacy project to honor her story, and this was just a formality to protect my privacy from the press, to make sure my quiet life stayed quiet. I remember the weight of the expensive paper, the crisp, important smell of the ink. My daughter, my brilliant, successful Madison, was honoring her story, and by extension mine. My hand didn't even tremble as I signed, where she pointed, my signature flowing across pages I didn't read. How could I not trust the little girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged? That night, the silence of my suite was deafening. I was watching the financial news channel, a habit I'd picked up to feel closer to Madison's world of stocks and ventures. A red banner suddenly screamed across the bottom of the screen. Breaking news! My daughter's company logo, Healing from Nothing, flashed behind the anchor. My breath caught in my throat. The anchor was talking about a massive class action lawsuit, about fraudulent marketing and a brand built on a lie. I leaned closer, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of the words. And then I heard it. The anchor questioned the very foundation of my daughter's success, the emotional core of her brand, her powerful, marketable story as a rags-to-riches orphan. The lie I had quietly held in my heart for years, the private pain I had swallowed for her sake, was no longer private. It was a federal crime being debated on national television. By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now let's get back to it. The shock from the news report didn't fade with the morning light. It settled into something colder, heavier. A terrifying kind of clarity. Every act of kindness from the past few weeks replayed in my mind, but now I saw the truth behind them. The filtered calls, the opened mail, the signature on that document. It wasn't about protecting me. It was about burying me. When Chloe Madison's assistant came to my suite with a tray of tea and that same plastic smile, I knew I couldn't afford to be the confused, loving mother anymore. I had to become a better actress than my daughter. I smiled back at her, a gentle, slightly dotty expression I hoped she'd buy. I told her I'd been thinking all night about the legacy project and how I could help. I mentioned a box of old photo albums in the study. There was one photo in particular I said that the biographer simply had to see. It was a picture of me, young and beaming, 9 months pregnant with Madison. I told her that if you're going to tell a story, you have to start where it all really began. You could practically hear the gears in her head grind to a halt. Her polite smile didn't just fade, it froze on her face. Her eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route. She mumbled something about making a quick call and practically ran from the room. I followed her just far enough to hear the hushed, frantic tones from the hallway. I couldn't make out all the words, but I heard enough. Madison's voice sharp and furious even through the tinny speaker. Fragments like physical evidence and containment. And how could you be so stupid? It was all I needed. Their grand conspiracy, the one that had erased my entire existence, was so arrogant they'd never even thought to plan for a box of old photographs. That chaos was my first real opportunity. While Chloe was still pacing in the hall trying to calm Madison down, I saw the gardener through the glass wall trimming the hedges. He'd left his smartphone sitting on the patio ledge. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked calmly to the kitchenette, called out that I needed some water, and while Chloe was distracted, I slipped out the glass door. My fingers felt clumsy, thick with adrenaline, as I unlocked the phone and found the messaging app. I typed a name I hadn't spoken in months. Sarah, my oldest friend, a journalist who could smell a lie from a mile away. My message was short, a desperate little flare sent out into the world. I just wrote, "The story Madison tells isn't true. I need you." I hit send, deleted the message, and placed the phone back on the ledge just as Chloe came looking for me. The storm broke 2 hours later. Madison's car screamed up the driveway, and she entered the house not like a daughter visiting her mother, but like a CEO conducting a raid. There was no pretense, no performance of loving care. Her eyes were chips of ice. She walked straight past me into the study and emerged moments later with the heavy box of photo albums. Then she turned to me. The fury was gone, replaced by something far more chilling, a sweet, condescending pity. She told me the stress of all this news was clearly making me confused, that I was becoming forgetful and agitated. For my own health, she said it was best if I had no distractions at all. And with that, she gently took the simplified phone from my side table. The last tiny link I had to the world. The cage wasn't gilded anymore. It was just a cage, and for the first time, I understood the danger was no longer just about my story. It was about my survival. After Madison took my last phone, the silence in that house became a physical presence. It was in the way the household staff would look at me with pity, but never meet my eye, in the way Chloe's visits became brief, sterile check-ins. They thought they had won. They thought the fight had gone out of me. And I let them. My new strategy was born from that silence. If they wanted a frail, broken old woman, then that's what I would give them. I became a ghost in my own daughter's house. I stayed in my room, I picked at my food, and when anyone looked at me, I made sure my eyes were distant and unfocused. I let my shoulders slump. I let the grief I truly felt for the daughter I'd lost show on my face, and they mistook it for surrender. The relief from Madison's team was palpable. They believed the problem had been solved. They believed I had been neutralized. While I was playing the role of a defeated mother, my daughter was fighting for her life in a sterile boardroom high above the city. The narrative cuts to Madison standing before her lawyers and the stone-faced investors who had backed her dream. The full, desperate truth of her hidden history is laid bare. The orphan story wasn't just a clever marketing angle, it was the collateral she'd used to get her first round of funding. It was written into the contracts. Her entire $10 million empire, her brand, her reputation, all of it was legally and financially built on the premise that I was dead. For her to admit I was alive wouldn't just be a PR disaster. It would trigger fraud clauses in her investment agreements. It would bankrupt her utterly and completely. Back in my silent room, my performance of frailty was my shield. It gave me the one thing I needed to be left alone. I waited until the house was deep in the grip of night, until the only sound was the rhythmic hiss of the sprinklers on the perfect lawn. Tucked away on a dusty shelf behind a row of books I hadn't touched in years was an old tablet, a relic from a time before my life was curated for me. Its battery was nearly dead, but it flickered to life. For what felt like an eternity, I watched it search for a signal, a lifeline. And then it found one, a weak, unsecured Wi-Fi network from a neighbor 2 houses down. My fingers trembled as I typed in the password to my cloud account. And there it was. My life. Decades of it all waiting for me. I began to download everything, methodically creating a digital archive of the truth. Photos of school plays, scanned copies of Madison's report cards with my signature on them, letters I had written, medical records. I was reassembling the ghost of the life my daughter had tried so hard to bury. A few nights later, armed with my secret arsenal, I saw the news alert pop up on the tablet's screen. Madison had made her critical error. High on her perceived victory, convinced I was no longer a threat, she had agreed to a live primetime interview to address the baseless rumors. I watched the broadcast, a knot of ice forming in my stomach. My daughter, the one I had raised to be strong and honest, sat there under the bright lights and cried flawless, camera-ready tears. She painted a heart-wrenching picture of her lonely, motherless childhood, a masterpiece of fabricated pain. Her performance was perfect, convincing, and utterly sickening. And in that moment, I felt a strange sense of calm. She wasn't winning. She was building the walls of her own prison, and with every tear, she was handing me the key. It was a lie so public, so profound, that she could never, ever take it back. I spent the next 2 days in a state of quiet anticipation, a strange calm settling over me. The house was smug with victory after Madison's television performance. Chloe would bring my meals with a triumphant little smile, confident that the last embers of my defiance had been stamped out. I continued my performance, shuffling through the hallways, my gaze vacant, letting them believe I was a ghost. But I was waiting. I knew my message to Sarah had been a single seed planted in the dark, and I had to trust that it would find the light. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the house's sterile silence. I heard the staff's confused murmurs. Unscheduled visitors were not part of the protocol. From my place at the top of the stairs, I saw her. Sarah. She looked older, her hair grayer, but her eyes were the same, as sharp and unyielding as I remembered. She wasn't alone. The man beside her was dressed in a simple suit, but he carried an air of quiet, unshakable authority that made Madison's entire security team seem like children playing dress-up. My text had been received. Madison was summoned from her home office. She descended the grand staircase with an expression of pure annoyance, a queen bothered by a trivial court matter. But the look on her face when she saw Sarah when she saw the man from the Consumer Protection Agency standing in her foyer was something I will never forget. Her mask of curated confidence didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Sarah didn't need my secret archive of photos and letters. She had a weapon that was far simpler and more powerful. She calmly reached into her briefcase and produced a single crisp document. She told Madison it was a legally certified copy of her birth certificate obtained through a public records request. She announced my name, Emily Ann Williams, as the mother, her voice echoing in the marble hall. That one simple, undeniable fact was all it took. My daughter shattered. She didn't scream or rage. She just collapsed inward, folding in on herself as the confession spilled out in a choked, desperate whisper. It was all there, the initial lie to the investors to make her story more compelling, the terror that had ballooned with every new round of funding, the deep, gnawing shame of her simple working-class origins, and the crushing weight of upholding the facade. The confession detonated the loyalty of her inner circle. I watched Chloe's face drain of all color, her expression shifting from smug confidence to raw animal fear. A lawyer who had been rushed into the room began to slowly back away from Madison, his eyes wide with the realization of the massive legal fraud he was now associated with. You could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. This wasn't about protecting Madison anymore. It was about saving themselves. The frantic, blaming glances they exchanged were the death rattle of their conspiracy. It was fracturing in real time right there on the pristine marble floor. That was when I stopped playing my part. I walked down the stairs not as a frail, confused old woman, but as the person in this room who held all the power. My steps were steady. My back was straight. The staff parted before me as if I were a stranger they were seeing for the first time. I stopped directly in front of my sobbing daughter and looked down at the ruin she had created. My voice when I spoke was not filled with malice or even anger. It was calm, clear, and absolute. I told her that she had created this reality, and now she would face it. I gave her the terms. She would call a press conference for noon the next day. She would tell the world the truth, all of it. Or Sarah and I would tell it for her. The power had shifted. The roles were reversed. I was no longer the secret to be kept. I was the truth that was coming out. And my daughter was finally, utterly trapped, of course. Here is the script for Chapter 5. The press conference was held in a soulless hotel ballroom the next day. The air was thick with the scent of ambition and imminent disaster. Every major news outlet was there, a pack of wolves sensing a kill. Sarah and I sat in the front row. My presence alone was a quiet bomb waiting to detonate. I wasn't there to speak. I was simply there to exist, to be the living, breathing proof that invalidated my daughter's entire life. I watched Madison walk to the podium flanked by a new, expensive-looking crisis team. She was pale, a fragile doll about to be broken. For a fleeting second, my heart ached for the little girl I used to read bedtime stories to. But that girl was gone, and this woman, the CEO of lies, had to face the consequences. I was not her mother in that room. I was a witness. Madison began to speak, her voice trembling but sticking to the script. It was a masterclass in corporate non-apologies. She talked about brand narrative errors and unfortunate miscommunications. She was trying to frame the erasure of my life as a marketing mistake, a simple overstep. But before she could build a new wall of lies around herself, Sarah stood up. In the crisp, clear voice of a journalist who knows they have the kill shot, she asked her question. She wanted to know if Madison could identify the woman in a photograph. As she spoke, the massive screen behind Madison flickered to life, filled with a high-resolution image of me from 30 years ago, my face radiant with joy, holding my beautiful newborn daughter. The room erupted. A tidal wave of camera flashes and shouted questions crashed against the podium. At that exact moment, in the peak of the chaos, a synchronized chime echoed through the ballroom as every reporter's phone lit up with a push notification. A video had just been leaked. Sarah's timing was perfect. I didn't need to see the screen to know what it was. The collective gasp from the room told the whole story. It was the doorbell camera footage Sarah's investigative work had uncovered. The world was now watching the raw, unfiltered truth. Madison, her face a mask of pure rage, physically shoving me back inside the house. Her voice no longer the gentle, inspiring tone of a wellness guru, but a vicious snarl screaming those awful, unforgivable words. My investors think you're dead. You want to ruin me. You are supposed to be dead. The curated lie was gone. All that was left was the ugly, violent truth. The judgment was not delivered by a court or a jury. It was delivered by the internet, and it was instantaneous. On the live stream monitors, I could see the chat feed scrolling at an impossible speed, a waterfall of pure vitriol and disgust. The hashtag Madison Eyes a Lie was already trending worldwide. In the space of 30 seconds, my daughter's career, her brand, and her carefully constructed identity were utterly annihilated by the global court of public opinion. I didn't feel triumph, only a profound, hollow sadness. There was nothing left to say. I stood up. The reporters, sensing a final dramatic act, turned their cameras on me. I didn't look at them. I didn't look at my daughter. I simply turned my back on the smoldering wreckage of the life she had chosen and walked out of the ballroom, my quiet exit, the most powerful condemnation I could ever deliver. When I walked out of that ballroom, I didn't look back. Not then, and not in the days and weeks that followed. The aftermath for Madison was a tidal wave, and I watched it from a safe distance, like seeing a storm rage over a distant shore. The news came in fragments. Her company's stock was delisted overnight. The investors, armed with the fraud clauses I now understood all too well, enacted them without mercy, seizing her assets. A for sale sign went up in front of the magnificent glass house that had been my prison. And her brand, Healing from Nothing, became a bitter joke online, a permanent meme for the very worst kind of corporate hypocrisy. It wasn't a victory. It was just the inevitable tragic math of her choices. Months later, Sarah told me a journalist had finally tracked Madison down. She was living in a small, anonymous apartment in a city where no one knew her name. She had lost everything: the money, the status, the friends who were never really friends. The reporter's brief article painted a portrait of a woman hollowed out, bitter and isolated, blaming everyone but herself for her downfall. She hadn't found healing in her new nothingness. She had simply found an emptier cage. I felt a deep, profound sadness for her, for the daughter who had gotten so lost that she could no longer find her way back to the truth. My own life, in stark contrast, began to bloom. I was the star witness in the class action lawsuit, and when it was all over, the settlement was substantial. But the money was never the point. The point was what it allowed me to build. I used a portion of it to establish a small nonprofit, a foundation dedicated to helping artists and writers from working-class backgrounds tell their own authentic stories. I reconnected with Sarah and my other old friends, the ones whose calls I had missed. My days were filled with reading applications, with coffee and laughter, with the simple, quiet joy of a life lived honestly. My world, which had been shrunk down to a single, silent room, had expanded into something richer and more peaceful than I could have ever imagined. The final scene of this long, painful story isn't dramatic. It's quiet. I'm sitting in my cozy office at the foundation, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window. On the wall in front of me hangs a single large framed photograph. It's the picture of me, young and proud, holding my newborn daughter in my arms, the very photo that broke the story and set me free. I look at it now, not with the sadness of what was lost, but with the peaceful strength of what was reclaimed. That girl in the photo, the hopeful young mother, she never truly disappeared. She was just waiting for me to finally stand up and reclaim her life, her history, and her truth. In the end, the story of Emily and Madison became a quiet lesson on the nature of truth. Madison constructed a dazzling empire, a fortress of branding and status, but it was built to protect a single heavy lie. The grander the fortress, the more fragile it became, because the lie at its center was a hollow space. Emily, in contrast, had nothing to protect but the simple, unadorned truth of her own life. And the story showed that a lie, no matter how powerful, must be constantly defended, while the truth only needs to be revealed.